be my lightning talk on the machines that we at Adoptium have to use for building and testing. This is the goal of this presentation is to give like a high level view with an emphasis on our vendors that we get our machines from and the architectures and the platform that we cover. Uh, I think I'm going to post this link to the Miro board in the chat if anyone wants to. How do I find the chat? Okay, never mind. I can't find the chat. Uh, but I'll be switching between the Miro board anyway, and then I'll post it later when I can. But yeah, it's a nice little view of all our machines that I'll be. Oh, there's chat. Okay, I found it. It just popped up. Oh, okay, G did it. Thanks, G. Okay. Okay. So yeah, vendors and architectures will be the emphasis of the machines. So in the next slide is a nice little overview of how our infrastructure looks from like a high level. So on the left, we have the way we separate our infrastructure by functionality. We have a build and test machines, which are self-explanatory. It's where we build and test our JDKs. Docker host, which is a bit of a mix between build and test because we just build out and test our JDKs in Docker containers, and then other infrastructure. So that covers anything from Jenkins, Nagios, etc. I'll cover that after towards the end of the slide, presentation. And then to the right of that, we have all our vendors. Some of them are companies that you might recognize, but others are like universities, for example, Marist and OSL. OSL being the Open Science Labs of Oregon State University. And then below we have Stuart, who's in this call. Some of the machines that we use to test our ARM32 binaries are old Droid computers sitting in Stuart's bedroom. These are all set up with our Ansible playbooks that you can find in the infrastructure repository, our GitHub infrastructure repository. And then just below, bottom right, we have a nice list of the architectures and the platforms that we cover. Yeah. So moving on, we have our build machines. I'm going to switch to the Miro view, which is a lot nicer than this, but I thought I'd separate the build machines by architecture first before I show them in Miro. But yeah, it gives a good view of what our build machines look like when we separate by architecture. We have a lot more x64 than the others. And then I just want to go through the types of builds that occur in our infrastructure. So we have our native builds, which happen on these machines. Then we also have some dynamic agents. So Jenkins will spin up a Azure dynamic agent on some of the builds, build the binary on those agents, and then dispose of the agent. And then we also have a Docker builds, which occur on our Docker host machines, in which the binary is built in a Docker container. So that was the view by architecture. I want to show you the view by vendor on the Miro board, which is a lot nicer. So if I zoom in, this is why I gave you guys the link yourself, because I'm going to be zooming in quite a bit. So if you guys want to sort of view the Miro board on your own, that's cool too. So this is a nice sort of view by vendor. As you can see, for some vendors, we only have some architectures. So for example, Marist supplies our S390X, SiteOx, our Spark, yeah. And then, yeah, I guess that's pretty much to say all I have to say about build. Going over to test, again, another architecture style view before I go to the Miro board. It's obvious that we have more test machines than build machines. For every JDK version that we build, we have about 9 different build pipelines. That's 9 different architecture and platform combinations. But then for each of those build pipelines, we have, I think, about 15 test suites that we run. So for that reason alone, we have a lot more test machines than build machines. Now, tests occur on these machines, but then we also have, which I'll show later, our Docker host machines, which are essentially a farm of Docker containers in which tests also run, which is in addition to our test infrastructure. So I'll show you on the Miro board our test machines look like by vendor. If I can zoom out, ooh, yeah, that's good. Like I said, there's a lot more test machines than build machines. There's a bit of I guess a few points I have to make. So at the bottom, we have PLCT labs, which supply our RISC-V machines. Even though by name they're test machines, they're currently also our build machines for that architecture. And then at the top with Equinix, you see I've separated them, Equinix and then Equinix VMware ESXi. That's because the second VMware ESXi one is our hypervisors that we provisioned from Equinix. And then on those hypervisors, we have our hosts. But again, I've sort of colored them by architecture. We have ARM, x64, etc., etc. And again, it's certain vendors like Marist and OSL are supplying certain architectures while others are supplying x64, etc. But yeah, that is our test view. And this one, Docker host, which is a personal favorite of mine because I do a lot of my work here. As I mentioned earlier, our Docker host machines are essentially machines that we use to run a bunch of Docker containers, and each of those Docker containers are their own Jenkins nodes in Jenkins that we use for testing only. So at the moment we have well, I'll show you what one looks. Oh, sorry, what the Docker output looks like on one of the x64 Docker host machines, for example. It's like I said, it's just a bunch of Docker containers, each of which is dedicated to run tests only. And again, they're set up using our Ansible playbooks, as every machine in our infrastructure is. Right now we have around 58 containers, last I counted, and they cover a bunch of those architectures: x64, PowerPC, 64LE, S390X, ARM32, and ARM64. But at the moment, we only have Linux and Alpine Linux containers. For example, we don't have Mac, we don't have AIX at the moment. So this is again another view by architecture of the containers that we have. As you can see, our ARM64 Docker host contains also our ARM32 containers. Yeah, so I'll go with the mirror board to give you a better view. Oh, this way. So yeah, each of these bubbles represents one Docker host machine, and then on those machines we have a bunch of containers. Again, Marist gives our S390X, OSL, our PowerPC. In fact, we have an ARM64 Docker host machine that's not been set up yet, but which is supplied to us by OSL, that is waiting to be set up. So that should make a nice addition to our infrastructure once it's set up. And then finally, we have our other infrastructure, like I mentioned. Again, I'll show it on the mirror board. It's a lot nicer. So starting from the top with IBM Cloud and going clockwise. Our Vagrant and QEMU playbook. Let me say that again. Our IBM Cloud provides us a machine that we use to run our Vagrant and QEMU playbook check jobs. These are essentially Jenkins jobs which we use to test any changes that we made to our playbooks. Then we run them through both of those jobs to see if we haven't broken anything. And then going clockwise, we have TRSS, which is our TRSS instance, which is a service we use to monitor our build and test pipelines. Then we also have our Jenkins and our Nagios machines. Nagios is what we use to monitor our infrastructure. It's a lot of the work that we've done. A lot of the work on our Nagios service was done by Scott, who's I think on this call. I'm not sure. And then again going clockwise, we have our Bastillion server, which the infrastructure team, which is me, Scott, and Stuart, use for SSH key management. So that allows our keys, our SSH keys, to be present on each of our machines automatically. And finally, AWX. That's our server that we use to deploy our Ansible playbooks. So yeah, that's more or less what I wanted to show.